So let's talk now about what you discovered about MSNBC and NBC in particular, because this was really, I don't know whether you would have won the defamation claim against them, even though we now know what they reported was untrue. But they did try to cross some T's and dot some I's. So when I was reading up on the case, I was like, how did they win this? And then I got to the page that explains how you won it. But just to set it up, they did try to do some things. They reached out, right, to the doctor for comment, and they included, I think, his denial in the ultimate report that it wasn't true. But that, as it turns out, wasn't sufficient because why?
Well, they did include his denial, which was general. And one of the things to keep in mind here, and that was very frustrating for Dr. Amin, is, he's a doctor. He is bound by the laws of HIPAA. He can't go digging through his medical records and throw them up on the screen and say, see here, this is why I did the hysterectomy. These are the hysterectomies I did. He cannot talk about specific patients. He cannot talk about specific things that happened with them. And so that general denial was all he could do. But what was true, and what we just got worse as we were peeling back the layers during discovery, is this whole thing started with Julia Ainsley and Jacob Soboroff were working together on an article that was going to be for NBC News Online. And they were calling immigration lawyers in Georgia, obviously speaking to Don Wooten. And what they found in the course of doing that is that the immigration lawyers were telling them, when this story broke, we started calling our colleagues. One of the immigration lawyers that they talked to was a leader in this 15,000 plus member association of immigration lawyers all across the country. And she had access to all the ones there in the Southeast and Georgia in particular. They were not seeing high numbers of hysterectomies. And they told the reporters at MSNBC, that's unclear whether it was Jacob that they told or Julia, but they told one of them, we are not seeing it. We are calling around. We are asking people to report to us, and we are not seeing it. Going to air, they really only had hard evidence of one hysterectomy. And they had that from an immigration lawyer who told them, and she had cancer. That's what they had. Now, they said they had more than that, but they never did. The most they ever had was 2. That's what ICE was saying, is that there were two reported out from ICE, and that they were approved through their internal procedures to be necessary. And then you had Standards, who was looking at that article.
Standards and practices. We've talked about them with my audience. It's at NBC. It's pretty rigorous, where you go through this team of lawyers and sort of professional journalists who make sure, or try, that you don't defame people in your reporting. And especially when you have a report like this that's incendiary. I mean, you're setting this guy on fire with these allegations. It would be subjected to higher scrutiny. So keep going. Keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. And I personally felt sorry for Christopher Scholl, was the deputy head of standards at the time. And he was clearly pushing back. And he was saying, we have this one source. She has no direct knowledge, because she told even Jacob Soboroff, I didn't go with the women during their medical treatments. I mean, Dr. Amin never set foot onto the campus of Irwin County Detention Center. The women were brought to his private medical office. Don Wooten said, the alleged whistleblower, I didn't go there. I don't know what happened. So she has no firsthand knowledge. And the deputy head of standards is pointing this out, guys. Hey, we have one source with no direct knowledge. This is sensational. We've got these folks saying, maybe we found one. You've got ICE saying there's 2. We don't have it. And there's evidence that we developed that Standards never actually approved that online news report, which ended up being the basis for all the on air. Now they dispute and say, oh yeah, we did approve. But there's some emails later where the deputy head of standards is saying, these articles shouldn't go out without Standards seeing a final version, and they should not be considered approved based on answers to questions, which is all there was, back and forth, all these emails, questions, answers, but then more questions. And then all of a sudden the news article is up and Julia Ainsley's on Deadline White House. And then from there, it goes to Chris Hayes, it goes
Nicole
to Rachel
Wallace's
Maddow.
show.
Yep.
Was the original article on NBC.com or MSNBC.com?
NBC News. .com. Yeah, wow. It was an NBC News story. Mm-hmm.
Wow. And those warnings from Standards and Practices were issued prior to them posting that article and then doing all these segments on MSNBC?
Yep, prior to posting the article online and prior to any on air, including the Deadline White House show. And then you had Chris Hayes behind the scenes internally with Standard saying, this whole thing went viral because it sort of brings up all these Third Reich, Jim Crow, Mississippi hospitalization experiments. And that's not the case here. That's what he said internally. That's why it went viral. It's so sensational. It brings up all these bad historical implications, but that's not true here. He acknowledges that internally. That same night, he goes on his show and he says, this story went viral because of the historical ramifications of any kind of coerced sterilization of an immigrant population. So the exact same thing that he said this is not internally, he told the viewers, that's why this is such a big story, because this is what it makes us think of. It was very, very reckless and very disappointing to me to see it happen this way.
Incredibly two-faced. Here he is having that same nurse on his show, again, after all these warnings from Standards and others behind the scenes. SOT 37.
You have detained women. I had several detained women on numerous occasions that would come to me and say, Miss Wooten, I had a hysterectomy. Why? I had no answers as to why they had those procedures. And one lady walked up to me here this last time around between October of 19 until July the 2nd. And she said, what is he? Is he the uterus collector? Does he collect uteruses? And I asked her, what does she mean? And she says, everybody that I talked to has had a hysterectomy. And you just don't know what to say. I mean, I don't have a answer for why that they would come to me and they would say, is he the uterus collector?
Now, in that interview, did Chris Hayes express strong skepticism, like, this is hearsay, you can't produce the women, how do you know it's 6? Like, was there anything to mitigate the damage in those allegations?
No, and that was the bigger problem. It would have been one thing to say, okay, here's what Don Wooten is saying, but we haven't been able to verify from anyone who was actually in the room. We haven't looked at medical records. We're being skeptical here, which internally they were saying, Standards was saying to Chris Hayes specifically, we need to be skeptical. And in fact, they were just validating. I don't remember if it was Chris Hayes or other on-air talent or his producers that were calling Don Wooten their hero. And our hero is here to share the truth with us, just really putting her up on a pedestal, and then calling Dr. Amin a so-called medical professional. That's how things were going behind the scenes. So they're definitely saying one thing behind the scenes, and then they're saying another thing on air. And then it goes up. So you've got Nicole Wallace at Deadline White House, then you've got Chris Hayes, All In. And then after that, you've got Rachel Maddow, which really took it to the next level. And we alluded to it earlier when she made this really an election issue and said, this is the Trump administration's mistreatment of immigrants. And Dr. Amin is part of that, and going through the child separation policy and going through tracking of immigrant women's menstrual cycles when they're in detention. And now Dr. Amin, the next chapter. And that was such a terrible, outlandish thing to say. But even more so because earlier that day, when she was internal records during discovery revealed, she had been having her production meeting with her team. And she starts out saying, if it's true, we should go with it. But there's some reason to be doubtful here. I think there's a lot of jumping to conclusions. And then according to the document, 8 minutes later, she is saying this is going to be the A block, and this is going to be the next chapter of this immigration situation, with no evidence that we ever saw that any new information came in. And that to me is just so egregious. And she's got such a platform, and so many people look up to her as a smart and hardworking and thorough journalist. And for her to be so flippant about Dr. Amin and what he did here just was really too much.
Did she explain in the deposition why the change of heart in 8 minutes?
No, that there was not that. And in fact, for her and some of the other folks that we deposed, on-air talent, but also producers, what struck me was how flippant folks were about, that was a long time ago. I do a lot of stories. I don't remember. That one just didn't stick out for me. And I thought, how callous. And yeah, maybe it was a flashpoint in time for you. Maybe it was part of some agenda for you. But this was Dr. Amin's life. This is what he lives with every day. Maybe you can move on from it in a second and put it out of your mind and not worry about how reckless you were. But he had to live with this. He had to live with the death threats, the bomb threats, the constant calls to his office, the following of him, the name calling, some of the most vile things to be called. His own staff, he had several Hispanic women working for him. He lost some employees over this. A lot of the women stayed, and they took also flack in their own communities and with their family and friends because they were working for him. But they knew, they knew this man. They knew that this wasn't true. They knew that how these women were treated, which was well when they were in Dr. Amin's office. And thank goodness they stood by him. But it was a terrible time, and he wasn't able to move on.
Can you tell a story, Stacey, of what happened with his son, who was off to the Cleveland Clinic as a doctor in his own right?
Absolutely. Dr. Amin's son, his middle name is Mahendra, the same as Dr. Amin's first name, Paraj Mahendra Amin, Dr. Amin himself. And when all of the news hit and Dr. Amin was very scared about what was going to happen to him and others, he immediately thought of his son, and he called his son. He said, you might get calls because your name is so close to mine. And if you get calls, just tell them you don't know me. Just tell them that you don't know me, that it's just a coincidence that you have the same name, because he was so concerned that his son, who just gotten his dream job, was going to be affected negatively about this, so much so that he was just like, pretend like you don't know me. And that just breaks my heart. I mean, Dr. Amin is a father of 4, caring husband, doctor, father, and to know that he had to say that to his son, it's heartbreaking.
You've heard about tariffs recently, plus inflation, supply chain disruptions. It's a lot, but there is a silver lining that most people missed. President Trump specifically exempted gold and silver bullion from the tariff talk. The administration preserved the ability to diversify into precious metals. If you are concerned about your savings, consider a free consultation with a Birch Gold precious metals specialist. The first step is to text MK to 989898 and receive your free no-obligation info kit on gold. Learn how to hold gold and silver in a tax-sheltered account. Birch Gold will help you convert an existing IRA or 401k into a gold IRA for no money out of pocket. With an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau and thousands of thankful customers, consider texting MK to 989898. Again, text MK to 989898 to claim your free info kit right now. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.